Hi there, my name is Lisa Arnold, and today I'm going to be delving into the topic of English language teaching and the colonizing legacy of English, what potential ELT teachers must be wary of as they prepare to teach English in communities practicing cultures different from their own. In his book, English and the Discourses of Colonialism, Alistair Pennycook states that English language teaching is a product of colonialism not just because it is colonialism that produced the initial conditions for the global spread of English, but because it was colonialism that produced many of the ways of thinking and behaving that are still part of Western cultures. European and Western culture not only produced colonialism, but they were also produced by colonialism. English language teaching, therefore, is the same, not only riding on the back of colonialism, but also birthed by it. ELT's historical ties to colonialism have strengthened notions of the self and the other, or, in this case, the native speaker versus the non-native speaker dichotomy. This concept is inseparable from coloniality and racial inequality. To discuss this topic from a post-colonial point of view, as I am about to, we realize the various roles that the English language played as a colonial tool throughout history. Sometimes it was used to spread European and/or Anglo-American language and culture. Sometimes it was used to develop a workforce able to participate in colonial capitalism. Sometimes it was a colonial obligation, and sometimes it was used to maintain the status quo. Either or, it's crucial that English language teachers not ignore the context of English's colonial and racialized past. Because we are aware of the English language's colonial past and the negative impacts of this, you would think that we would be adamant to ensure that all traces of colonialism have since been obliterated. This is not quite the case. English has expanded itself into nations in which it has no historical or official role. As Western-trained teachers, either knowingly or unknowingly, import their foreign practices onto other countries, they reinforce processes of colonialism and empire. To clarify, think about the tradition of schooling in North American culture. It's had a complicated history, tangled with evolving ideas about race, nationhood, gender, cultural identity, foreign policy, religious freedom, and property rights. There's no doubt, then, that national policies and philosophies, both historically and in contemporary times, play a role in determining the practices and character of today's ELT classrooms. ELT teachers must be wary of the potential for what Joel Spring calls deculturalization, or the destroying of a people's culture in order to replace it with a new one. This can be done unconsciously by well-meaning educators as they make decisions about how and what to teach, what behaviors to encourage and or discourage, and what routines they instruct their students to follow. Next, I'm going to introduce some important terms and concepts related to this issue of colonialism and English language teaching. It's important to note that the next few slides discuss findings credited to B. Kumaravadivelu, also known as Dr. Kumar, a professor of applied linguistics who has published many works on the topic of English language learning and teaching. This is a quote from one of his papers from 2003. The English language, in its long march to its current global status, was aided and abetted by colonialist and imperialist projects that trampled upon the political, cultural, and linguistic heritage of millions of people across the globe. To begin, it's important to discuss some relevant terms. Some individuals have proven that the originally Western language of English can be used for communicating socio-cultural nuances that are completely alien to the Western culture. Cultures can adopt it as their own, essentially. This is what Kachru calls nativization, or the emergence of world Englishes that delineate their use of English in certain specified domains. Many people learning English as an additional language do so for communicational necessity and do not allow it to affect their cultural identity. This is necessary to nativization. People learning English for strict communication purposes must ensure that they keep the language separate from their local cultural beliefs and practices. It's important that this term not be confused with decolonization. Dr. Kumar claims that nativization is a relatively simple process that has been largely achieved by many cultures, a process that marks only the beginning of decolonization. Decolonization, on the other hand, is a complex process that works to erase all traces of English imperialism in order to claim ownership of English language teaching and learning enterprises, essentially the process of taking control of the principles and practices of planning, learning, and teaching English, a task that has not yet been fully accomplished. According to Dr. Kumar, the process requires communities taking control of the principles and practices of English language teaching, which would involve shifts in policies and programs, as well as in the methods and materials currently governing English language teaching, like the centering of Western interests over the industry. While language teaching methods vary around the world, many still tend to adhere the colonial concept of method. Methods are used to encourage everything associated with the colonial self and marginalize everything associated with what is other. Basically, this is Dr. Kumar stating that, after an extensive review of literature in applied linguistics and other related fields, method is a construct of marginality that positions the native self as superior to the non-native other. Part of the neocolonial agenda is to render local knowledge invisible and inaccessible, thereby making periphery communities continue to depend on the centering of Western interests. These periphery communities do not have adequately documented knowledge bases in second language learning and teaching. This occasionally leads to individuals within these peripheral communities to either knowingly or unknowingly legitimize the characteristics of their own otherness or inferiority that were attributed to them by the dominating group. This is what Dr. Kumar calls the practice of self-marginalization. This practice manifests itself within program administrators, teacher educators, and practicing teachers in certain periphery ELT communities. An example of this includes private and governmental agencies in these periphery communities posting job announcements that require and/or prefer native English speakers. Sometimes these postings proudly proclaim that all of their English teachers are native speakers. I would like to zone in on the potential issues that arise as native English speakers are positioned as the preferred instructors of English as an additional language in peripheral communities. Firstly, most native speakers of English have very little personal experience in learning a second or foreign language. There's less motivation to learn additional languages when you already are fluent in the most widely spoken language in the world. Secondly, many native speakers lack professional preparation in teaching abroad. They receive basic and personal courses that qualify them to teach abroad in a matter of weeks. These courses often fail to challenge individuals to think deeply about the potential impacts their teaching may have on the communities they're entering into. That leads us into my third point. Native speakers teaching abroad who have educated themselves on the various impacts their English teachings may have on peripheral communities do not often believe that it is their right or function to question the rationale for educational policies in the societies they are working in, even if they believe the policies may not be in the best educational interest of their students. As David Gonzalez Nieto states in the concluding paragraph of his text, The Emperor's New Words, Language and Colonization, language is a tool, and never a neutral tool. The election of words brings to life a specific representation of reality. Therefore, we should envision a language usage that promotes different points of view and encourages dialogue. But how can we as English language teachers effectively do this? The first step is to acknowledge your privilege. The fact that you're able to travel the world and likely get paid more than a local teacher for doing essentially the same job but without the same qualifications is a privilege in itself. Unless you've studied classroom pedagogy and effective methods and procedures for teaching English in another country, you're probably not totally prepared to avoid neocolonialism in your teachings. Your privilege isn't earned so much as it's just that you happen to speak the chosen language. As you enter into your ELT classroom, you may feel as if this is the first time you've ever been the minority. Let me tell you something. You're not. You are not the other. What you choose to do or not do in your classroom may have an incredible impact on your students' lives. As Alyssa James says in her text, this is the antithesis of minority status. Ignore this feeling and this potential discomfort. Empower your students to take ownership of their own learning. As I discussed earlier, English has often been considered a requirement for social mobility in colonial hierarchies. The ability to speak the language fluently can be viewed as a status symbol that indicates your level of education and worldliness. It opens more doors for employment, for travel, and for global communication. Many people begin to believe that English is the magic wand that can open the door to prosperity. Those who fail to become proficient in the English language sometimes become ashamed of their own language and therefore begin to formulate oppressive attitudes toward themselves or their peers. In order to avoid influencing internalized oppression, promote multilingualism within your classroom. While many organizations that hire you to teach abroad will advise you not to speak the language native to the community you're teaching in, this implicitly supports the hegemony of English. If you are able to speak your students' native language, try to occasionally ask and answer basic questions in that language in order to make the classroom a more welcoming and comfortable space for your students to learn. If you don't speak the language, allow them to do so with each other every now and then, if it encourages their comprehension. Maybe ask your students to teach you some words and phrases in their language. There are ways to do this that allow them to simultaneously help them practice English. Be sure not to inadvertently teach your students that learning English comes at the expense of their own language or languages. Culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy was popularized by Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. It suggests that students should be presented with course content that relates to and is intertwined with values associated with their own cultures. In other words, teach English in a way that your students can actually use and relate to in their day-to-day lives. In order to do this, you have to get to know your students. Figure out their likes, dislikes, interests, hobbies, etc. Ask them to describe to you what they would like to learn more about and the things that they would like to do in class. Once you've got something to work with, incorporate these concepts into your lessons. Remember to teach in different ways. If your students enjoy music, drama, visual art, writing, you name it, use these methods to teach. The fifth and final step is to travel not with the intent of helping, giving, or offering something that you have to others, but to travel and teach as if you have something to gain and to learn because you do. This will never change. Be open-minded, curious, and grateful for these opportunities to grow, and you will come out of your experience with so much more than you came into it with. That's all, folks. This discussion was inspired by a number of inspirational people's research and hard work. Please check out any of the works here if you'd like to educate yourself further about this topic. These references will also be posted below in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and good luck on your future endeavors.